Hey, this is Bottom, and I'm gonna be talking about game theory as always. But we're done with the theory. We're gonna move on to discussion. So, what do I mean when I say discussion? What I mean is that, um, we talked about a lot of theory, and hopefully it's still all there in your mind. But what it means is a little bit mysterious. It's sort of this terse mathematical thing, but it doesn't come together as sort of really feeling like it gives you a direction in game. And so discussion is all about looking at what we've talked about, the mathematical theory, and seeing what it means, in practice when we're actually playing a game. So this is what the discussion videos in general are going to try to answer. So the first thing, the most important thing, is we saw two kinds of strategies. So those two kinds of strategies were maximally exploitative strategies and equilibrium strategies. So the maximally exploitative strategy was when you fix your opponent, this maximizes your EV. So if you know how your opponent's playing, you can play a maximally exploitative strategy that takes advantage of your knowledge of how your opponent's playing. The equilibrium strategy, we said, was best when you're fixed. This was a proposition that if you have to fix your strategy, you're best fixing an equilibrium strategy. So of course, equilibrium strategies at equilibrium, if your opponent's also playing an equilibrium strategy, then you're also maximally exploitative. But in practice, these two things feel fairly different. Really, the way I think about it is that a maximally exploitative strategy is offensive, as in it's an attack on your opponent. You know what your opponent's going to do, and you're going to take advantage of them. An equilibrium strat I think of as being defensive. So what that means is that I don't know what my opponent's doing, but they might know what I'm doing. I should play an equilibrium strategy to be safe. And that's how I think about it. So when I go into a game, here's this sequence I recommend. So if I have no inclination at all, no idea what my opponent's doing, I would do this. I would say, going into a game, play an equilibrium strategy. Until you know your opponent's strategy. And then as soon as you know your opponent's strategy, you want to go to your maximally exploitative strategy. And you want to do this ASAP, as soon as possible. And the reason you want to do this is because well, you might ask why, right? Is because versus if your opponent isn't playing an equilibrium strategy, um, EV of your maximum exploitative strategy tends to be much, much bigger than EV of your equilibrium strategy. So for example, say you go to play rock, paper, scissors against Bart Simpson, and you don't know how Bart Simpson plays. So you say, okay, well, I'm going to play the equilibrium strategy. So you play 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And as we saw in that one lemma, this is 50-50 against every other strategy. So you're going to win as often as you lose, regardless of what Bart Simpson is doing. So you play for a while, and you see that Bart throws rock every single time. You don't want to play the equilibrium strategy for very long, right? You want to maximize your expected value. And here, you maximize your expected value by playing always throw paper, right? Which is not an equilibrium strategy, but it is a maximum exploitative strategy against Bart's strategy. So the sooner you can switch to winning half the time to winning all the time, the better off you're going to be. So I would advocate, as soon as you have some idea that your opponent is playing something exploitable. So when I say exploitable, I mean a non-equilibrium strategy. You want to switch to and exploit that as soon as possible. So, I think that in practice, if you play rock, paper, scissors against someone and they throw rock 3 times in a row, I think you start throwing paper about there. I mean, 3 or 4 times is how long I would wait before I just start throwing paper and see what happens, right? And of course, if he doesn't switch, I'm going to keep throwing paper. So I made the suggestion, right? And you might ask, is this dangerous? When I say if your opponent throws rock 3 times in a row, start throwing paper, he could be playing something else. He could be playing, scissors 2/3 of the time and rock 1/3 of the time. And throwing paper all the time is a bad idea. You're going to lose. And it's not that unlikely. I mean, throwing rock 3 times in a row is something like 3%, right? And, 3% is a pretty big number. That happens. And you might worry, well, oh no, I'm gonna get got, right? I'm gonna transition to a strategy which is incredibly exploitable itself, right? Always throw paper is not close to being an equilibrium strategy, and if your opponent knew that you're playing always throw paper, you would be in serious trouble. So the question is this dangerous? Does this actually happen? And the answer is not usually. And so why is that? And the answer is that to exploit someone, you really have to know their strategy. So what do I mean? I mean, it's very unlikely for you to get exploited by chance. So it could happen that, you think their strategy is one thing, you start exploiting it, and it turns out their strategy is exactly the thing that counters the way you exploit it. This can happen, but the point is that it's very unlikely. It's as unlikely as it working out. Not to say that it's unlikely it'll work out, but it's no more likely than your approach working out. It's always a good bet to go for it, unless your opponent is like extra tricky and like really high level. But in Atlas Reactor, for example, that doesn't happen. If you look at how the top tournament players play right now, they don't do that. They don't like play those sick mind games that would make you think about this. So to sum up, you're unlikely You're unlikely to run into trouble by chance. Here's a way to model this. And it's sort of a model, sort of an example. So Alice and Bob play rock, paper, scissors. And Alice and Bob are going to play mixed strategies. So she's going to play PR, PS, or RP, and PS. And Bob plays QR, QP, and QS. So PRP, P, and PS, QR, QP, and QS are probabilities, and they sum to 1. So this could be like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but it could also be like, 1/10, 9/20ths, 9/20ths, whatever, right? And I'm gonna say let's say they choose these probabilities at random. So Alice goes onto random.org, generates a random number between 1 and 10, and that's going to be her PR times 10. So she's going to get either 0%, 10%, 20%, 30%, all the way up to 100%. And then she's going to take whatever's left and generate a random number, and that's going to be her PP. And then she's going to take the rest, and that's going to be her PS. And then Bob's going to do the same thing for his. So they're going to choose random probabilities, a random strategy. And the outcome, of course, is 50-50 on average. Which means, Alice and Bob are doing the same thing. So just by symmetry, of course, neither of them is more likely than the other to win by generating a random strategy. So what this means is that even if you pick some weird strategy, your opponent is, you're going to exploit your opponent with that random strategy as much as your opponent is going to exploit you with that random strategy. So what that means is that you shouldn't be too scared to just go and try something, because even if it's wrong, it's it's not unlikely, but it's not likely that you're going to get hurt for it. You're not going to get burned. Or on average, you're just going to break even if your bold guess, if your bold guess was wrong, you're just going to break even. And so that's why you shouldn't be afraid of making bold guesses. Shouldn't be afraid of making bold guesses about your opponent's strategy. Again, this is tempered a little bit if you know your opponent is an incredibly strong player and that they can take advantage of you, but this is not really a consideration in Atlas Reactor. Like if you're playing, high-level poker, and you're playing a large sample with some high-level poker players, then this is the kind of thing that you start considering. But certainly for smaller games like Atlas Reactor, this is, this advice holds true. I would strongly recommend that you start making bold guesses as soon as you can, because you're not going to run into trouble probably. Or you're as likely to run into trouble as you are to, hit the jackpot. So it's not going to hurt you on average. So that's sort of the approach that I take when I go into a game. I start off by playing the equilibrium strategy, and then as soon as I have some inkling of what my opponent's doing, I try and take advantage of that as hard as I can. And that's, I think, a good procedure to maximize your EV. Um, but you might wonder, why not start off with a bold yes, right? Because we just said that, um, on average, a bold guess is just as likely to help you as it is to hurt you if it's really like a completely random guess. Um, and the answer is, um, you reduce variance by playing the equilibrium strategy. So what does this mean? So if you go into a game of rock, paper, scissors, and you say, I'm just going to play 100% paper, and we'll see what happens. Well, if you run up against Bart, then that's great. You're winning 100% of the time. If you run up against someone who always plays scissors, then you're going to lose 100% of the time. You're going to do very badly in the game. And if your assumption is that you're just as likely to hit one or the other, then on average you win half your games if you average over your possible opponents, which is the same as if you just played the Nash equilibrium. But the issue is that when you play your 100% paper strategy, you've got a very high variance strategy. You're either going to win a bunch of games or you're going to lose a bunch of games. Whereas when you play the equilibrium strategy, you're going to win half and you're going to lose half regardless of who you're against. This is useful because, or this is desirable because in general, when you play games, you assume that you're the better player. I mean, if you're not the better player, then I guess reverse this advice. But I mean, in general, if you're playing against someone, usually you shouldn't be playing against them if you're not the better player. I mean, at least this advice holds true in poker. In Atlas Reactor, sometimes you gotta play someone better than you. So reverse this advice and play bold strategies if you're worse. But if you're the better player, you want to reduce your variance because what it means to be the better player is that you're more likely than your opponent to identify their strategy and to exploit it. And so you want to not lose too hard in the early game so that you can get to the later game and beat them there where you actually can make use of your advantage, right? Because going in completely blind, no one is any better than anyone else. So the fact that you're a better player manifests itself in the fact that late game you're better, and so you want to get to the late game without a huge disadvantage. So you should play a low variance strategy. So that's why I recommend starting off with an equilibrium strategy, but then as soon as you have an idea of what your opponent's doing, boldly transition to a maximally exploitative strategy, even if you're not extremely confident or even slightly confident in your opponent's strategy.